The fires in the Middle East are not a tragedy of geography, they are a transfer of wealth. While the world tracks every missile launch in the Levant and every drone strike in the Red Sea, a structural inversion is taking place in the global energy markets that no one in the mainstream press is willing to name. This is not a story about a regional conflict. This is a story about the terminal failure of the Western sanction regime and the moment Moscow realized that chaos in the Middle East is the greatest economic stimulus package in Russian history. We are witnessing the birth of a new energy paradox. As the West burns through its strategic reserves and diplomatic capital to keep the Middle East from exploding, Vladimir Putin is quietly consolidating a monopoly over the global flow of energy that will dictate the next decade of your life. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is the hidden math that explains why the price of gas at your local station has nothing to do with supply and demand, and everything to do with a calculated geopolitical heist. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the Kremlin turned a global crisis into a $37 billion windfall, while the United States was busy looking in the wrong direction. If you're new here, subscribe to Daily Brief right now. Hit the notification bell, because in the hours ahead, this story is going to move fast, and the legacy media isn't going to give you the numbers I'm about to lay out. Let's go back, not 72 hours, let's go back to the spring of 2022. When the invasion of Ukraine began, the G7 and the European Union made a promise to the global taxpayer. They said they would choke the Russian war machine by imposing a $60 price cap on Russian crude. The theory, championed by the U.S. Treasury, was that the world could keep Russian oil flowing to prevent a price spike while simultaneously starving Moscow of the profits. It was a neat academic solution that ignored the ruthless reality of the physical commodities market. For 18 months, the mainstream media told you the sanctions were working. They pointed to a temporary dip in the ruble. They cited data from the Yale School of Management suggesting the Russian economy was imploding. They were looking at the wrong map. While the West was celebrating its moral victory, the Russian Ministry of Finance was building a shadow fleet. According to reporting from Lloyd's List and Windward, over 600 aging tankers were purchased by anonymous shell companies in Dubai, Hong Kong, and Istanbul. This wasn't a secret. The warning signs were visible to anyone tracking maritime insurance clusters. But the West ignored it because they needed the oil to keep flowing to prevent an election year inflation spike. Then, the Middle East ignited. The moment the first projectiles were fired in October 2023, the risk premium on global oil didn't just rise, it bifurcated. And this is where the math becomes devastating. Let's break down the economic math of this windfall into 4 specific components. Component 1, the Urals-Brent convergence. For 2 years, Russian Urals-grade crude traded at a deep discount, sometimes $30 off the global Brent benchmark, because Western refineries wouldn't touch it. But as the conflict in the Middle East threatened the Strait of Hormuz, that discount evaporated. According to data from Argus Media, the spread has collapsed to less than $11. For every dollar the Middle East risk premium adds to the price of oil, Russia captures more of that dollar than they did a year ago. If you're a family in Ohio paying $3.50 for gas, understand this. A portion of that price isn't going to an American driller. It's an indirect subsidy to the Russian Treasury because the global floor has been raised. Component 2, the shadow fleet premium. By bypassing Western insurance and shipping, Russia is no longer paying the compliance tax. The Financial Times recently reported that Russia's oil revenues in the last quarter hit their highest level since the start of the war, exceeding $11 billion per month. Let's do the running calculator. That is $132 billion on an annualized basis. To put that in perspective, the entire U.S. aid package to Ukraine is roughly $60 billion. Russia is generating the equivalent of 2 entire U.S. defense packages every 12 months just from oil exports. Component 3, the India-China reroute. This is the part the State Department doesn't want to discuss. India, a key U.S. partner in the Quad, has increased its intake of Russian oil by over 1,000% since 2021. According to Kepler data, India is now the world's largest buyer of Russian seaborne crude. But here is the trick. India refines that cheap Russian crude and sells it back to Europe as diesel. The molecules stay the same, only the price tag changes. The European consumer is still buying Russian energy. They're just paying an Indian middleman a massive markup to feel better about their values. Component 4, the LNG monopoly. While everyone is watching oil, Russia is quietly seizing the global South's heating and power markets. Despite sanctions, Russian liquefied natural gas (LNG) exports to the EU reached record highs in late 2023. According to Global Witness, the EU spent over $5 billion on Russian LNG in just 9 months. Stop. Let that land. The same nations sending tanks to Kyiv are sending billions of euros to the Kremlin to keep their lights on. The running total of these four components puts the Russian windfall at approximately $37 billion in excess profits above their 2023 projections. One single devastating summary. The Middle East conflict has provided the perfect geopolitical smokescreen for Russia to dismantle the Western financial order. Now take a step behind closed doors. Inside the Kremlin, the decision-making isn't being led by generals, it's being led by technocrats like Elvira Nabiullina, the head of Russia's central bank. While the West thought they were fighting a 20th century war of attrition, Russia was playing a 21st century game of sovereign wealth management. There are two camps in Moscow right now. The first camp, the hardliners, wanted to weaponize energy by cutting off supply. The second camp, the one that won, argued for strategic saturation. Their plan, keep the oil flowing, keep the West addicted to the supply, but move the entire transaction infrastructure outside the reach of the US dollar. As one senior advisor inside the Russian Ministry of Energy privately admitted to Reuters, the more unstable the Middle East becomes, the more the world realizes that Russian oil is the only reliable alternative to the chaos. This is the ultimate irony. Russia, the nation the West labeled a pariah, is now positioning itself as the stable alternative to the volatility of the Persian Gulf. They are watching the U.S. Navy spend millions of dollars per interceptor missile to shoot down $2,000 Houthi drones in the Red Sea, knowing that every time a tanker is diverted around the Cape of Good Hope, the shipping costs for Russian oil, which moves through the safe internal waters of the Northern Sea Route, become more competitive. The consequence cascade of this is already hitting the markets. This isn't just about Moscow, it's about the collapse of the petrodollar. When Saudi Arabia sees that Russia can successfully sell oil in yuan and rupees without collapsing, the incentive for the Saudis to remain anchored to the US dollar vanishes. This is the nobody is connecting these dots moment. The Middle East fire isn't just a military crisis, it is the catalyst for the de-dollarization of the entire energy planet. If this analysis is making sense to you, hit like. It helps the algorithm push this data to people who are still trapped in the 24-hour cable news cycle. If you live in Germany, if you are a manufacturer in the Midwest, understand that your energy costs are now being held hostage by a feedback loop between the Levant and the Urals. When the Suez Canal is blocked or threatened, the demand for Russian pipelines across Eurasia spikes. Russia isn't just taking control of the oil, they are taking control of the transit. They are building a fortress Eurasia that is immune to the pressures of the Atlantic Alliance. We are now facing two paths. Path one is the de-escalation path. In this scenario, the U.S. successfully brokers a regional peace in the Middle East, oil prices stabilize at $70 a barrel, and the Russian windfall begins to dry up as the risk premium evaporates. But for this to happen, the U.S. must exert incredible pressure on its allies and enemies alike, something the current domestic political climate in Washington makes almost impossible. Path two is the spiral. The Middle East conflict expands into a regional war involving the major producers. Brent crude spikes to $120. The Russian shadow fleet becomes the only way for the world to avoid a 1970s-style global depression. In this path, Russia becomes the de facto central banker of the energy world. They dictate who gets oil and who stays in the dark. The West's sanctions become a historical footnote, and the U.S. dollar's role as the global reserve currency enters a terminal decline. The single variable you cannot control is the timing of the next escalation. Look at the widest possible lens. This is not about a border dispute in Eastern Europe or a religious war in the Middle East. It is a structural transformation of how power is measured. For 70 years, Power was the ability to protect the sea lanes. Today, power is the ability to bypass them. While we were focused on the high-tech weaponry of the future, Russia focused on the low-tech plumbing of the global economy, tankers, insurance, and pipelines. The human cost is measured in the inflation that eats your paycheck and the heating bills that force families to choose between warmth and food. The macro has landed at your kitchen table, and it arrived on a Russian tanker that technically doesn't exist. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you believe the West has any tools left to stop this energy pivot, or has the horse already bolted? Is the U.S. actually incentivized to keep the Middle East in a state of managed chaos to prevent a total Russian monopoly, even if it hurts the consumer? I read every single one of your responses. This is Daily Brief. Subscribe if you haven't. The story isn't over. It's barely begun.